time, but you get Undead Berg right here on the hill that leads to the sewage area. And so I'm being just a little bit of a chatterbox here, so we can all see the camera pan all the way out like this so that you don't lose your frame of reference for the main character. Now we can watch him walk up the hill. And it's at this exact spot you got yourself an Undead Berg. And then that little area just after Andre the Blacksmith, you got this indoor area with little glimpses of a forest peeking out of crumbled ruins. But it's very dark, and when you get out of this building, it is definitely not quite as dark. So how do they pull off this effect? It's a lot less complicated than you would think. Panning the camera out is going to show you that there's a couple of trees that are planted there, and then behind that is just these really choppy looking deconstructed domes that are placed on both sides. And in Lost Izalith, I wanted to show you the slide from another angle. I thought that would be kind of fun. It's a bit of a long slide as you go down to the boss, and I thought it would be really neat to just watch the main character slide down this while also showing you the slide in almost its entirety in one shot. Also, here's an angle of this boss that you normally don't get to see. This thing's pretty massive, and you don't ever get to really loop around it because you go inside of it. Spoilers, I guess. Plus, the whole fight scene is so chaotic, it's not really often that you get to soak in all the details of this particular boss. And also, the fog gate. Now, obviously, every single time you go through a fog gate, it's going to be a little bit different, but I figure for Quilag's fog gate, I take the camera out of bounds to show you the full circumference of where the fog gate starts and ends. But here's one that might really shock you. How about when you sit at a bonfire? Did you ever stop to think about what that amber fog looks like as it resets the map for you? You ever thought about how that looks out of bounds? I honestly didn't, and I accidentally got footage of what that looks like one time, and so I went back and redid it and got you some really good footage of the fact that that fog technically isn't HUD. It's placed in front of the camera. And so what you got to see was both what it looks like when enemies' placements are completely reset and what the entirety of that bonfire fog looks like from another angle. We're going to do Undead Berg here, and it's going to be at the top of the tower where you come across the second Black Knight. All right, let's start talking about a fun one. This is character models. Let's start with the human characters without any helmets on. What does that look like inside of the geometry? Now, I'm a little bit surprised by this one because they have flat eyes, in other words, not orbs for eyeballs, but they have eye sockets for some reason. I say for some reason because I can't think of any scenario in which you would see the eye socket of an NPC character or your own character model in Dark Souls. And before anyone says, well, when you're undead, obviously, but like that's a completely separate model, and the eye sockets of the undead versions don't match up with this at all. And speaking of eye sockets, almost all of the humanoid characters that are undead in Dark Souls have glowing red eyes, but once they're dead, you can see that they have eye sockets. However, there is one enemy in this game, and I don't know if this is just like a beta element that got left behind, like a scrapped idea that the team just kind of overlooked, but this one enemy type has eyes, and it's not easy to see with the red glow, and it's probably why it made it into the final build of the game. But if we take the camera further back to an enemy that is not locked on the player, you can see what this looks like without the red glow. This is really bizarre. Again, if you find any other undead in the game, it's just eye sockets. So it's so strange that this standalone type of enemy happens to have eyeballs. And whether or not this enemy has eyeballs is completely up to you. To me, they kind of have like superhero eyes, like Venom or Spider-Man or something. But anyways, taking the camera up close can show you that they have white, thin eyes, which is another very bizarre one. Once again, I show this off to you guys because typically you're gonna find that when engaging with these enemies, there's a red glow that completely covers up these details. Now here's one that's really difficult to see. The crystal lizard. I was actually pretty shocked to see that if you take the camera really up close, they do in fact have their own eyeballs. It's just really difficult to see because the enemy is so small and the eyeballs are kind of covered up by its own furrowed brow. And then I want to show you the blacksmith in Nulando Ruins. Taking the camera inside of his cell can show you that he's not actually sitting on the environment, instead just kind of floating in mid-air so that the player could see him better. Speaking of characters that are locked in a cell, the Firekeeper for Firelink Shrine, as you know, is really difficult to get a good look at. So I took the camera inside the cell and put it up to her face to show you some of the finer details of the model. And honestly, I'm a little surprised by this, but the character, I believe, is blind and also mute. And then there's Guinevere. Now, in the original episode, I made a mistake of taking my character over there, and if she gets 1 point of damage, she will die. So she has 1 HP. This time, we're just using the camera, so that won't be an issue. And I just wanted to show you that the character, surprisingly, is modeled in a very intentional way, with the developers knowing full well that this model would never be seen from behind to the player, and so back parts of the leg and her back are simply not modeled. And then there's my favorite character, Sigmar Katarina. Even have a little figurine of him behind me. He's awesome, and he's also one of the characters where you could do a little bit of boundary breaking of yourself to see that his head is fully modeled inside the helmet. This is mostly because the helmet is so massive. There's also a giant slit in the helmet itself, so the developers really wanted to kind of give you an opportunity to see what it would look like inside, which is really cool. But the other characters have a bit of a dilemma. By equipping a helmet, you lose the details of the character. Now, I lost this footage, but I just take my word for it. Solaire in the vanilla game, if you went inside his helmet, would be bald and would be missing his chin. But there's this mod that I found thanks to the YouTube channel Crestfallen, which I highly recommend you guys check out if you want to see more characters from Dark Souls 1 without their helmet. I'll leave a link to it in the video description too, why not? Anyways, these are the actual faces just without their helmet wear, which made me really surprised to find out that Havel had a fully modeled head. And I say that because by taking the camera inside of the original OG helmet, there would be no evidence of a face in there, but there was weird details to the helmet. I'll show it here in Blender. Like if you remove layers of the helmet, you'll see like a low poly version of the helmet inside the helmet. It was different, very different. Anyways, moving on to Quelaag, I know what all of you want me to check out, so I got you covered. And yes, inside of Quelaag's face, there seems to be a weird plane just behind her eyeballs, which is bizarre. I can't really explain why that would be the case. It must be a modeling error. But what's even cooler than that is that her eyeballs are like blood red, not bloodshot, like straight up blood red, like pure crimson blood. And then her teeth are metallic. She has little fangs, and in case you're wondering, no, the regular human models don't get fangs like that, so that's kind of like specific to Quelaag. And also there's a mole on her face. If you look at the mole really closely, it looks like it's just like a drop of blood and not actually a mole. And now let's talk about the Mimic. There's a lot of cool things to talk about here. First of all, I just want to compare the original chest to a Mimic chest. And I know that the big giveaway is that if you look at a chest long enough, you might see the Mimic move, which a regular chest won't do that. So, like, that's the easiest indication to know that you're dealing with a Mimic chest. But in case you don't want to sit around and wait for the Mimic chest,